What's the scariest city you've been to? Rizhao, China. Not scary so much like the others. China is insanely safe, but extremely creepy. I felt like I was on a movie set. First off, it's a city of 500,000, but it's built for a population of 10 million. But it's not like those ghost cities out west where there never was anyone. It seemed like it was actually a big city, but everyone just left suddenly. The beaches were well maintained and empty. The buses ran frequently and were empty. The streets were lined with all the usual Chinese stuff and were empty. We went into a breakfast restaurant, and the food was great, but we were the only custom, and the staff seemed surprised to see us. We asked for directions to the famous fish market. No one there could tell us where it was. It turned out to be about 750 meters away. It was massive and filled with vendors selling huge quantities of incredibly fresh fish. It was mostly empty. Also, almost everything was open until the wee hours of the morning, if not 24 hours. This is unusual even in the biggest Chinese cities, let alone this abandoned town. It was just an unsettling experience all around. I have traveled lots of places in this world. The most scared I have ever been was lost in downtown Baltimore at night on a weekend. I had made a series of mistakes trying to go around the city and had accidentally taken a spur that put me right into the downtown. I have no clue what area of town I drove through, but the only human beings that I saw out and about at 3 in the morning looked like zombies. It's really hard to describe, but the way that they moved, the way that they looked at me as I drove by, it was very scary. Out of desperation. This was way before cell phones did anything more than phone calls and basic texts. I was still using a paper atlas. I stopped at a 7-Eleven. I was waiting in line to ask directions, and a guy went out of his way to ask me what I was doing there. That's how much I stood out. I told him that I was trying to get directions to get back onto the highway, and he told me that he was an undercover cop. Things were about to go down right there, and I needed to leave. I told him that's what I was trying to do. He thought about it for a second, told me to get in my car, follow him, and try to keep up. He would get me to an on-ramp and then go back to the store. He drove like a bat out of hell and did get me to the freeway and then busted a U-turn and flew away. I have no clue how bad my night would have continued to be if he hadn't been there and guided me out of there. St. Louis. It was weird for a few reasons, but the scariest was when I was leaving the hotel myself, my mom and my 2 large dogs were staying at. We saw a man messing with my car, like hood was propped. As I started raising my voice and approaching with my large barking dogs, he ran. I made sure to push the hood down so it would latch, or so I thought. We loaded the car up and drove away as fast as possible. As soon as we got on the freeway, the hood blew up and almost hit the windshield. I honestly have no idea how it didn't, maybe a safety feature? So I had to pull over and re-secure it. Mofo obviously messed something up on purpose because he pulled up behind us. I got back in the car, my digs and mom losing their shit, drove slowish, put my hazards on, and my mom called 911. He sped off after taking pics. Weirdest experience of my life. The hotel was so sketchy, and my intuition was telling me to leave the entire time. I honestly think the man was in on something with the hotel staff, or was hotel staff himself. My 2 dogs were extremely on edge, and they're generally easygoing. Plate numbers were stolen, and police wouldn't doing anything. Cairo in Egypt. As a white non-Muslim female, the amount of sexual harassment I experienced was unprecedented. It's interesting because I didn't necessarily worry about someone attacking me or stealing from me, but I worried about other things happening. The entire country is impoverished and corrupt. At one point, I saw a police officer hold a child, like 7 years old maybe, at gunpoint because the child was acting out and he thought it was funny. At another point, a person got hit by a car and a couple bystanders were doing everything they could while most kept on walking as if nothing was even happening. I was at a restaurant near there and it took over 30 min for an ambulance to get there. I'm unsure if he made it. I can't even tell you how many homeless children I saw begging for food/money with no parents anywhere to be found. I've been to other countries where this is a common scam tactic, but this was totally different. The reality is that when a country is that corrupt, public safety goes out the window. That is actually what scared me most about it. Juarez, Mexico. I'm an Irish Mexican, redhead. Went with cousins to see my aunt and uncle. At the time, '07, it was the most murderous city on earth. My family members were in a cartel. There was a cartel war going on. Had armed men all around at all times. For all the money and cars and opulence at their home, it was like being in prison. The tension in the air was thick. I was treated like a king, but that whole week I was terrified inside. Different world. Was told, no matter what happens, do not call police. They worked for the other guys. I was told that if shit kicked off and anyone made it through the gates, to grab a gun and shoot myself. That would be the best possible outcome. I haven't been back. Decades ago, on a college trip to Europe, we went to Kosice in Slovakia. We got to the hotel, and I asked the front desk worker, in English mind you, if it was safe to walk to the local bars and restaurants. She replied, no. I thanked her, took a taxi. We were there for 4 days, and every time I asked if it was safe to go here or there, everyone always responded with, no. At the time, I thought Slovakia must have been the most dangerous place in the world. Years later, I found out now, no is Slovak for yes. I once accidentally crossed the wrong border from Thailand, traveling to Laos. I ended up in a place called the Special Economic Zone of the Golden Triangle. No data, couldn't speak the language, nothing. I ended up in some weird hotel that looked like a jail cell. I managed to book a 36-hour bus journey out of there for the next day. That evening I went for a walk around. I was offered child prostitutes, and when I realized how extremely dangerous this place was, I went back to my room and went to sleep. The next morning, police raided my room with guns pointed to my head. I later learned the only real reason any Westerner would ever travel there is because they haul mass amounts of opium out of there, so I was a suspected drug dealer. Also, I accidentally pissed some guy off who I assume was a gangster, so I don't know if that had some part to play. Terrifying. Now, I sometimes get questioned at airports because of my travel history. I'm not sure this counts, but I drove through Gary, Indiana recently. It was fucking weird. I have never seen many abandoned homes/buildings and homes. The neighborhoods were decrepit and deserted. I didn't see anything shady happen, but it was fucking weird. I was diverted there by my GPS when returning to Chicago from Michigan while driving on 90. I got stopped at a train crossing when the train came to complete stop. I said nope and drove back to the highway. I'd rather sit in bumper-to-bumper traffic through purgatory than to have to drive through Gady again. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. At the height of the Iraq War, it was still listed as more dangerous. The gangs ran the city, driving around in technicals with mounted machine guns. Hotels had 6-foot-thick concrete-walled fences with razor wire and armed guards. For an added cost, they offered grape cages, a cage that would drop down over your bed when a sensor was triggered to protect you from being graped if people broke in. Bahnhofsviertel in Frankfurt, Germany. I've lived and worked in some of the roughest places in the US, Baltimore, Detroit, etc. That section of Frankfurt is the only place that has legit scared me since moving to Europe 15 years ago. Open-air drug market, prostitution, addicts, scammers, pickpockets. Wild place. Honorable mention to the cab driver in Belgrade, who sussed out I was American and took the scenic route to my hotel to show me all the buildings that were blown up by American bombs, like it was my fault. I went to college in Utica, a city in central New York, primarily run by the mafia. It was ranked as one of the 10 safest cities in the US at the time. You could walk anywhere as long as you didn't interfere. In the 4 years I was there were 3 murders. A guy who turned state's evidence was shot in a crowded bar, but no one saw or heard anything. Another locked themselves in the trunk of their burning car. It was ruled a suicide. And someone jumped into the river in midwinter. Another suicide. I'm laughing at all the American cities listed here. Canadian cities get straight up guffaws. It was Guatemala City for me, but that's just because the driving was terrifying. The buses were awesome though. My travel companion, who has worked all over the world as an Army Ranger and duty employee, would not allow us to leave the hotel after dark. That said, visiting Tikal was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Highly recommended. Wonderful people and incredibly affordable. I have a friend from Honduras, and the stories he has shared are nightmare fuel. He would sit in the hospital while his dad was dying of cancer and regularly see MS-13 members coming in missing arms from machete attacks. Albuquerque, NM. I dropped off a U-Haul there and got an Uber to a sketchy hotel, chosen for its proximity to the airport. Not having my own transportation made me very anxious. At the hotel, the line of people, meth heads I assumed, in front of me couldn't provide a credit card for a room, so the line got short real quick. The small, weird elevator had bloodstains nearby, so I took the stairs. I had given my Uber driver $10 to let me stop and get food so I wouldn't have to leave until it was time to go to the airport. I went to the room with my bags and food, locked everything, and wished for more locks. The food was great. I lived on the south side of Atlanta for 4 years and never felt this sketched out. Though I did get my carry permit in ATL. Nothing like East St. Louis apparently, but that's my story. Was in St. Louis with my cousin and we crossed that bridge. East St. Louis has got to be the most dangerous feeling place I've ever been. Street lights busted out at night, everything run down, abandoned, bullet holes in the stop signs, etc. We pulled up GPS and got the fuck out of there real quick, lol. Tijuana. I saw a dead body on my way to the bus terminal, just laying on the sidewalk. There were people standing around him, smoking, drinking, and just having a good old time while dude is just dead, like dead AF, stiff, purple and blue. Wildest shit I've ever seen. No one gave a single shit. East St. Louis. A white guy with my GF in the car stopped there for gas, and a cop pulled up behind me, asking what I thought I was doing there. I replied getting gas, and he tells me that I'm not safe, and told me he'd escort me to the highway, and also not to stop at any red lights until we get to the exit. Like, I could tell that was a sketchy gas station to stop at when I pulled in, but didn't realize it was that bad. Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Every property surrounded by solid fences topped with razor wire, and if you can afford it, patrolled by armed guards and guard dogs. As a visitor, you should never use a local taxi or walk outside your hotel compound at night. Johannesburg. Went there on a school rugby tour when I was 17, and our coach pulled up outside the Apartheid Museum before our visit. The outside of the coach was quickly surrounded by people who banged on the sides and crowded around the doors. Don't get me wrong, a coach load of British school kids visiting a racially sensitive museum was obviously going to draw attention. The people mobbing the coach were desperate and mad, but it was terrifying. The bus driver basically told us that we should leave any valuables on the coach, but couldn't guarantee that it wouldn't be broken into. So he planned to drive away and meet us later, which was also terrifying, given we were going to be stranded there. Nothing happened, but it was very intimidating and a horrible situation for those people. We had played a township rugby team from Langa Township near Cape Town a week earlier, and most of our squad gave our opposition any spare kit, boots, and gum shields we had. Generally, we had no issues elsewhere with the local people. I went back 7 years later as part of a sports charity that offered sports education and activities for township schools. The kids were unbelievable. It's a beautiful country with a lot of still healing wounds. Overtown and Liberty City neighborhoods of Miami. I lived not too far from there 20-some years ago. Drove a coworker home one night because she missed the last bus. She called some guy on her phone to tell him to let people know not to mess with the blue Focus about to come down the street. I felt like I had a hall pass from danger. Work on ships for a living. Years ago, 2017, we had a major engine failure off the coast of Guatemala and had to pull into Santo Tomas/Puerto Barrios. Absolutely wild. We were told not to leave the ship, but we needed to get groceries. We got some booze and just sat on the ship. Night 2 of sitting there, we heard a car explosion. Apparently someone macheted a taxi driver because he recently visited a rival place and they burned him alive in the car. We were just a block away, absolutely wild time. Baltimore. Had a convention there a few years ago. I was told to not stray more than a block from the hotel that was in the nicest area downtown. Later in the day, while riding in a taxi, I asked the driver if this was good advice and he agreed. He immediately turned and pointed to the street corner while we were stopped at a red light and said a man was shot in the back of the head in the middle of the day in front of the nicest mall in town. Lima, Peru. We were warned to keep our heads down, and the Americans in our party were told to try and hide the fact. We stayed one night, literally walked to a food stall and back to the hotel. An American and a Peruvian tourist had their taxi stopped by police a few nights before we arrived. They were forcibly taken to jail and passports taken. The American managed to eventually get his passport returned after payment of a substantial bribe. No one heard from the Peruvian again. We were told not to stop for anyone, including police. We left very early the next day, witnessing a packed coach fall over a cliff on the very steep drive out of the city. Not a particularly pleasant memory of our 3 months in South America. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Almost got robbed literally 100 feet outside the airport walking to a cab. Luckily I saw police and my instincts made me shout hard, which made the police aware and the thieves fled the scene. Almost lost my brand new Nikon back in the time. Durban, South Africa for a 3-day conference. Day 1. The locals were mugging conference attendees on the way to their hotels from the airport. Day 2, they were mugging attendees while they walked a block from the hotel to the conference. Day 3, they were mugging attendees in the conference center restrooms. This was a close second to Johannesburg, SA, which featured one huge part of town that was just dirt and shanties, utterly the poorest people on earth. Meanwhile, another part of town had every single house and business surrounded by tall fences with barbed wire on top, including gas stations. To this day, I'm still clueless how they got gas there. But the worst of the worst was Chengdu, China. Upon entering the hotel, they took possession of my passport. Every time I left for any reason, a military-garbed dude at the door would take notes and snap my photo on his phone. He did the same upon my return. Not to mention watching CNN on TV there. Suddenly, the channel just turned to snow before returning to normal, like nothing happened. Come to find out, that was their government censoring in real time. And of course, the creepiness that is the Great Chinese Firewall. Literally, you only see what they are okay with you seeing. I think every American should be required to vacation in China for a week, just to see what a truly iron-fisted government looks like. You'd come back loving every bit of America and have a newfound appreciation for your freedom. Laredo, Mexico. When I was 11, my dad lived in Austin, and I lived in Oklahoma, so I would go visit every summer. I begged and begged for him to take me to Mexico, and he caved, and we walked across the bridge to Laredo. We had a great first hour or two, and then shit started getting sketch. I was walking behind him, carrying the bag with all the stuff we got, and I felt someone grab my ponytail and the back of my shirt and start pulling. I reached for my dad, who fortunately was within reach, and he pulled me towards him. At that moment, we made the decision to head back across, but as it was starting to get dark, men started catcalling me. We made across just fine, but for an 11-year-old, that was terrifying.